Thanks for joining us this morning as we explore the real story behind true myth, otherwise known as
the ultimate story. I feel it in my bones.
Even better that time. True myth. Christianity is God's story expressed through reality, while other stories are imitations and human interpretations of that ultimate story. Our culture has often fallen prey to assuming that only things we can prove are true. The fact is that we're constantly learning how little we know. We also find out that some myths never die. Why is it that some stories resonate with us on a deeper level than other stories? So, what is a true myth? Before we can answer this question, we must answer what a myth is. So, Erica, how do most people today, using today's definition of myth, how would they view what a myth is? If I say, "Oh, that's a myth," what would most people say that is?
A made-up story, a fabrication, something that is just hobbled together. A camp story. Campfire story where you're sitting around the campfire and someone makes up a scary story to go along with or scare you at night.
Right. Yeah.
That would be what most people think of as far as myth goes.
Yeah. Or if they say, well, the Bible's just full of myths. What are they really saying when the Bible is full of myths?
Like I said, just made up, fabricated, human designed. Just lies that are used to control humanity.
Control. Okay. So there's a motive behind it. We saw that in Dune, right? When we did the review on Dune.
Yeah. Not C.S. Lewis, but yes.
Yes, Frank Herbert.
Frank Herbert, not C.S. Lewis.
Frank Herbert's interpretation of the role of religion is used by governments as an arm. We got a lot of comments about this too after we did that review, saying that, it's just a way to manipulate people's minds. And that's what religion truly is. So as we are looking into this, we're going to keep that in the back of our minds. That's not what myth originally meant. Myth meant something deeper than that. And so today, the word myth is synonymous with a lie, something not true. For the purpose of our discussion, we're going to use the older definition of myth. And you can think of it as like a myth genre, a type of storytelling. You have different types of stories, but there's a myth genre as well. The myth genre encompasses stories that are deeply rooted in cultural, religious, or traditional beliefs and often feature gods and heroes, supernatural beings, and symbolic elements. Myths typically explain natural. You have this idea of myth. And in these different genre types, that myth may be deeper than others. Like if you have a true crime story, well, you're not really dealing with too much a myth type of setup here. You might have archetypes. But if you're talking about maybe fantasy or science fiction, especially fantasy, now you're really starting to delve into things that may be more symbolic or have a deeper meaning associated with them. We can do this with archetypes too. You see, in literature, archetype refers to a recurring symbol, character, or plot element that embodies universal pattern or theme. Archetypes are deeply rooted in the collective unconsciousness of humanity and are found across different cultures, time periods, and literary works. They represent the fundamental human experience, emotions, concepts, and they're often invoke strong emotional responses from readers due to their familiarity and resonance. So as you saw on the screen there, you have different types. You have a creator, hero, magician, explorer, jester, outlaw, and so forth. And you can take a movie or a book that you've been reading and compare it to each one of these and say, hey, Han Solo, he fits this particular character. Or you've got Captain America, a main character, fits this particular character. Or Harry Potter, or whatever. you have these different characters. It doesn't have to be the main character, especially in these stories. Usually the main character fits one, and the supporting cast fits one or more of these other roles. And they don't all have to be there, but they're generally used in a way that fits really good storytelling. You don't want to do it as like forcing it into the mold. These naturally fall into these different characters. So you have myth and you have archetypes. The archetypes are like elements of the myth or the storytelling that goes into it, and the myth is the whole thing as it comes together. Now, we're probably going to take another live stream and look into this deeper at another time and say, hey, what are these archetypes? And can we have examples of this? And we'll look at modern day examples from movies or stories and try to fit them in to this and see if it just happens naturally. Archetypes and story tropes work because they resonate with the human psyche. We can explore Jungian archetypes or how they relate to modern movies. And like I said, we're going to be doing that in an upcoming video. But in the same way, these archetypes resonate with us. True myth transcends and fulfills longings expressed by other mythologies. So the idea is that you have myth that has symbolism and story and so forth, that has a deeper meaning than just saying something that happened. The other day, there was a car accident and so-and-so was hurt, blah, blah, blah. The ambulance came, took them away. They're okay now. They were just checking them out at the hospital. Okay, that's an event. That's a story that happened. But a mythology or a myth has a deeper meaning to the characters and events that are involved. But there is a problem with that. And that is that in the late 1900s, the late 1800s and early 1900s, modernism came around. Modernism was really good in that it brought forth, there's a scientific method, there was a bunch of other things that came with it that were ultimately good. But modernism is a philosophical and cultural movement that started around that time and tended to approach myth with skepticism and often sought to move away from traditional mythologies and narratives. Modernists value reason, scientific inquiry, and empirical evidence, which sometimes lead them to reject or reinterpret mythological beliefs as outdated superstitions. And if you're going to believe in, like, there actually is a god, Thor, thunder that comes down and stuff like that, okay, no, there is no god of thunder. That's not true. But there's often something that's deeper behind this that resonated with the people that were there. If you think about like the Vikings and so forth, that they're sailing the seas, and if you have storms that come up, that could be fairly serious.
Oh yeah, very, very easily.
So you can see where all this would find into them, and why was that important to them to have those type of beliefs and that understanding. Most modernist thinkers viewed myths as products of pre-scientific cultures attempting to explain natural phenomena, express sociological values and norms. They often saw myths as lacking empirical evidence and therefore considered them to be unreliable sources of knowledge about the world. So if let's say that we take a story and it has a lot of deep meaning in it, and then we take all that deep meaning out, we are talking about just pure events, because that's how the idea of modernism would look at it, say, just the facts, dude. I just want the facts, nothing else. You're making a police report. You give the police report. So let's take comparison of a police report to a movie like Lord of the Rings. If I do that, if I take Lord of the Rings and view it just as a police report, what would that do to the story itself?
Make it dry. Make it a lot more like a textbook.
Okay. So it would not have the full flavor that was there.
Wouldn't have the characters, wouldn't have the intrigue.
You'd have the names, right?
You'd have the names, dates. Good luck, you're in a history book.
Yeah. So if you like just reading history, you could just look at it as names and dates, and you've taken
the boring parts of history.
Yeah, you've taken out all the good stuff, and it really doesn't mean anything to you. Maybe you can extract from that to say, hey, there is we understand these events happen, these specific things. Let's look at the Gospels. If you might have somebody to say, if they're looking at it from a modernist perspective, to say, well, wait a minute, he was wearing a red shirt there, and this other guy says it was a different color. Let's look at an example of something in the Gospels when they're talking about maybe like the resurrection. After the resurrection, you have an account in Mark and you have an account in Luke, and they are saying different things about who was at the tomb and maybe the number of people that were there. If you have an account, it looks like there's a contradiction there. What would be the answer for saying that there is that conflict in
I specifically think I know what you're talking about. You're talking about the number of people who were there. Was Mary Magdalene there? Was Mary there? Who was the eyewitnesses to this event? If you read the accounts, it's not exclusive. It's not saying they were the only ones there. No one else was there. No, it was just saying that these people were there.
Right.
This individual was there. Just like the conference we just went to, the Apologetic Con down in Florida. If I were to say, well, David Wood was there.
Huh.
Well, does that mean, and then someone else comes along later and says, yeah, David Wood, IP, John McCrae were there. Does that contradict what I said? No. I didn't say that they weren't there.
Mm-hmm.
I just focused on one individual. Maybe that's the only individual I went to go listen to or go watch, or the only one that told me about it later on in the case of the Gospels. So if they were the primary witness that's doing all the talking and the others were just there, yeah, that's what happened, then that might be the only person you focus on whenever you're retelling the story later on.
Right. If you came specifically maybe to see one person at the conference, you would focus on that particular person in retelling the story. Or maybe you only show up to one day and you only see one person that was there, and that's the only time that person was there because that was when he or she was giving the presentation. And then someone else says, yeah, they were, but they weren't there that long. And so given an account like that, you see it from different perspectives. And this is mentioned in Cold Case Christianity. In giving a police report, you want to get as many eyewitness accounts that you can, because people are going to see things from a different perspective. If a police officer were to take, or a detective were to take different people's reports from interviewing different people, and they all had the same exact story, that police officer would question the validity.
Actually true or something fabricated later on. In fact, part of David's walk to come to Christianity is that's something that stood out to him, is that they weren't all the same.
Yeah.
Because if you would have, from his point of view as an atheist at the time, he was expecting, if it's something that was made up later, that they would all be the same.
Yep.
Let's be honest, he was in jail at the time. He's done some criminal activities, right? So he would be familiar with, okay, so if you're going to make up a story,
everybody's got to get it straight.
Everyone's got to get it straight. So we're all saying the same story. Well, then that would be an obvious fabrication.
Yep.
And that's not what we see in the gospel.
Exactly. And that's what in Cold Case Christianity, he was a former detective that wrote it. He was saying that they would start to question. They would expect people to see it from different perspectives. For example, Matthew, tax collector, Jewish person, would see things from a Jewish point of view. If somebody's eating, he would pay particular, what are they eating? Is it kosher? That type of thing. He would pay more attention to that, or fulfillment of scriptures, where Luke, who is Greek and a physician, may give a little more attention to, okay, this person has this ailment, this blind man, and give a little more specification for that. So people are going to see it from, and then you end up with these different perspectives. And this is the point. You end up from these different points of view, creating a 3D model of what happened. Otherwise, it's flat, it's 2D, and you don't have a good perspective of it. Even if you have security cameras that really don't tell the story behind the story, if you have security cameras, if you have them from two different points of view, you get a better idea of what's going on. Now, if you put those 2 points of view face right next to each other, you might say, "Oh, they're not showing the same thing. That can't be real. They must be showing 2 different events." No, you're seeing it from 2 different angles. So, in that way, myth is like this. Now, overall, modernist view of myth tended to emphasize rationality, skepticism, and focus on empirical evidence, which sometimes led to a rejection or reinterpretation of traditional mythological narratives. Writing stories or making movies from this point of view will make them as dry as eating a sawdust sandwich or reading the terms and conditions before installing new software. I mean, maybe you should read that. But not before you go to bed, because you're not gonna stay awake. It's gonna
give you nightmares.
That's true.
Depending on what terms and conditions you're talking about, it could give you nightmares. Who knows?
That's true. Which brings us to another couple of famous authors. We have let's take a look at this guy. Now, he is the one who invented the term or coined the phrase true myth. True myth, then, from his point of view, this is J.R.R. Tolkien. He embraced the concept of true myth, which he discusses in his letters and essays. For Tolkien, the term referred to the idea of certain myths and legends embodying universal truths with deep themes that resonate with human experiences. He believed that these myths, though fictional, could convey profound truths about morality, heroism, sacrifice, and human condition. Now, I'm not saying that the Bible is fictional. That's not what the case is. He was looking just at mythology itself. Remember, this is a guy who translated Beowulf. This is a guy who was a professor of medieval history and so forth. So he really studied this information hard, and it fascinated him. It also fascinated C.S. Lewis. Now, we did a review on the C.S. Lewis biography, The Most Reluctant Convert, right here, in which C.S. Lewis, when he was a kid, he kind of came across something that was an inkling of true myth that was there, an idea of sounding. So what we should probably look at comments.
Yeah. There seems to be quite a few there.
Guys, I'm so sorry. I'm on a roll with this. I just totally forgot to look at the comments. So I'm going to come back to Tolkien and just take a short breather and look at these comments, because I definitely don't want to forget these. You guys always have good comments here. Let's start with Thomas Hall. I'm going to throw this up here. In faith and believing, it's a good thing, because you usually get good stuff here. Torah Thomas always gives good stuff. Torah, especially Genesis, reads as myth. The prophets sometimes too. I think the Gospels and Acts surprise many people because it does not come across as mythical. Okay, so I would also say, now here you got to be very careful. We have to be very careful in using the term myth, because of the modern definition of myth being, like we talked about earlier, a lie, a made-up story, a fairy tale, and stuff like that to evoke some kind of response. But this has deeper meaning to it. I believe these events that were talked about in Genesis and so forth were real events. And we gave an example before where we're talking about the Hittites. 100 years ago, 150 years ago, the Hittites were looked at as being, they're just a myth. They didn't exist. And since then, we found out that the Hittite Empire itself was one of 3 major empires around the 12th and 13th century BC. And you can go to some major universities. We looked it up on their website. I think it was Stanford or Oxford. I think it was Stanford. Looking up, and you can learn even the Hittite language itself. So things that were just pushed off to say it's just a myth, we find out that they're actually true. So everything from the flood and so forth, these were events, I believe, and we can look at historically in some of the archaeological evidence that were true.
Actually, there's surprisingly a lot, even though there hasn't been I was surprised definitely at the conference that we went to. IP did a great presentation on the Exodus, historical evidence for the Exodus.
Right.
And he pointed out a few things that I didn't even realize really spoke to the entire story as being true. But I think we're going into that on Thursday, right?
Yes.
I know we'll be doing a review on my channel tomorrow on the just overall there. But you said we're doing 5 things that we learned from the conference.
Yes.
And I'd have to put that actually in one of them. There wasn't a lot of new stuff.
So yes, we will be going over on Thursday. We're going to be going over top 5 things I learned from the conference. Bring that back to you. This is an experience we had last week, and listening to these some of these top apologists last week. Some of the great presentations they gave, and we're going to be sharing that with you since you may not have been able to go to the conference. There's some good material that we can give to you from there. So I think, okay, so I'm going to put this up from Thomas too, because it looks like there was a discussion that was going back and forth in the chat. I believe they are historical too. By mythological is referring to the literary genre. Okay, thank you for the clarification. I thought that was the case, but I wasn't sure, so I appreciate you bringing that out. Yeah, so the idea of that particular genre is, again, deeper meaning behind what was there, that you're looking at these events, these historical events, and say there was something special that was going on here. There was a watershed moment, no pun intended for Noah, but there was a watershed moment here where there were some things that were changed, and it was instrumental in the development of the history of Israel, and Israel is being used as the conduit, the people through whom God is going to bring his Messiah. And so all these events in the Old Testament were important for that. Another comment I want to bring up, it says, literary styles must be considered when reading the Bible. I don't think we're supposed to read historical narrative like Acts the same way they read the book of Revelation, which has much allegory. Absolutely, positively true. There is a great book, and I've taught a class with this, How to Read the Bible for All It's Worth by Gordon Fee. I think it's Gordon Fee. Probably the #1 book I would suggest to anybody going for a Bible study. It's not big. It's a thin book, but he does talk about the different literary types that are in the Bible. And you would read Psalms differently than you would read, like you said, the Gospels or Acts, because these are, one is poetic, and there's a lot of poetry and deeper symbolism that's there than actual accounts that would be given, like in the Gospels. So yeah, very good. In fact, that might be worthwhile to do instead of one of our regular theology live streams, to just do a summary of that book in presentation format. I think that would be really, really good.
Yeah, POV is very important.
Point of view?
Yes, whose point of view it is.
Yeah,
I go through that with Muslims a lot.
Yeah,
because they always think that everything in the Bible is directly God's point of view on everything, and anything said there is God saying it himself. And no.
So yeah, that's how their literature reads, right?
Yes, that's how the Quran is. It is the literal, direct word of God according to them. So everything is dictated by God. That's why any variant in it is a huge deal. And there are multiple variants between Arabic Qurans. But that's why that matters in that case, and really doesn't in Christianity, because if you have two people's point of views, as we covered earlier, definitely in the Gospels, there's another section that what it sounds like to me is one of the writers just came in late to the conversation. You had the beginning of a conversation in one gospel, and in another gospel you have the end of it, and it just sounds like the guy went and took a pee break and came back late and caught the end of the conversation. That's what he wrote down. Yeah,
and I could see that. I could see that as being, from these different perspectives, you're going to see that. And you would the prophets, looking at the prophets, the Old Testament prophets. thus says the Lord, and they would say, a prophecy against the king of Tyre, or the talking to Jerusalem, oh Jerusalem, and there's going to be symbolic language that's going to be in there. I loved you like, I tended you like a vine, I kept you going. And then later on, Jesus uses that symbolism and says, I am the true vine. And Israel was there, but it's me. It really comes down to me. And if he wasn't the son of God, he would really have been kind of arrogant in some of the things he said. Some of the claims he made.
Yeah, he would not be a good teacher. If he was not God incarnate, he would be a horrendous teacher.
Or a lunatic.
Or a lunatic.
Or a liar. Right?
Yep.
Lord, liar, lunatic. Right here. Tolkien saw mythology as fundamental aspect of human culture and storytelling, reflecting humanity's innate desire for meaning and sacrifice. He argued that myths, even if not historically true in a literal sense, could still convey truths about the world and human nature. And again, he's not talking about scripture here. He's talking about mythology that he's been studying, right? In his own work, particularly in Lord of the Rings and the Silmarillion, Tolkien created a rich mythological framework for his fictional world of Middle-earth. He saw his stories as an attempt to create a mythology for England, drawing upon his experience of philology and his deep love for mythology and folklore. Ultimately, Tolkien's view of true myth emphasized the power of storytelling to illuminate truths about the human condition and the world, even within fictional contexts. Now, what about this guy, C.S. Lewis? Now, we've talked about them before, if you're familiar with the history of these guys at all, you would know that they were friends and that they also collaborated together in a writers group called the Inklings. I'm a part of a writers group too, and we critique each other's work. So these guys were tight. In fact, Tolkien led C.S. Lewis to the Lord. He was instrumental in C.S. Lewis's conversion. But C.S. Lewis has a slightly different take of this, of viewing this concept of true myth. He viewed it as a way to describe Christianity, particularly the story of Christ, as a myth that holds deep truths and is grounded in historical reality. Again, this is the older term of myth, not the newer or more modern term of myth being synonymous with a lie. C.S. Lewis argued that while myths from various cultures contain elements of truth and resonate with humanity's spiritual longing, Christianity stands apart because it's not merely a product of human imagination, but a revelation of divine truth through historical events. Lewis believed that God used mythic language and imagery, especially if you look at Revelation, there's all sorts. And that, by the way, that genre type for Revelation is called apocalyptic. There is a certain genre for that. Lewis used the mythological, that said that God used mythological language and imagery to present human culture and communicate profound spiritual truths, culminating in the incarnation, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. In essence, he saw Christianity as the fulfillment of the deepest longings expressed in other myths, making it a true myth that transcends and fulfills the myths of human imagination. So God is the ultimate storyteller, and his story, he's not just making it up as he goes. Well, I guess you could say God just made it up as he went, but when he makes something up, it's reality. He speaks it into existence. So, and all these other stories that we tell are really reflections of the ultimate story that are going. This deep-seated understanding and desire and drive. He said C.S. Lewis said it was a longing for joy. And that was the term that he did. Something just clicks when you see that. So finding myths in stories, we're going to be doing this over the next few weeks. We're going to be looking at different story types, modern stories, and say, where is the true myth? Is there true myth behind the scenes here? And if so, what is it? True myth is not in every story, but we're going to look at these without forcing them into the narrative. Now, over the next few weeks after our Easter special that we're going to be doing, which I'm really excited for because that's going to be good. And also, we got a lot. We're pulling a lot of strings to put this.
Of work
to put this together. So we've got that coming up. We also have the release of the next Godzilla movie. Now, this is the MonsterVerse version of it, not the Toho Studios Japanese version, which was Godzilla -1. This is a separate one, and we're going to start looking at that soon as a build up for that release of that movie. So we got two things coming up, but then we're going to get back into exploring what these are, what these myths are behind the story, and do any of these really in our modern story go beyond myth and really have resonance of true myth underneath them. So as a guide, I'm going to be using a book by Dr. Frank Turek and his son, Zach, called Hollywood Heroes. I'm going to throw this up on the screen again. And that book there in the middle is the one that we're kind of be using as a guide for this. It's something that you can pick. There's also an audiobook version of this as well. I had the joy of meeting Dr. Turek at the conference, and you can look on the community page for my channel, and there's a picture of me standing next to him. The guy is like 17 foot tall. So I'm like 8 foot tall. And then he is like, shut up.
I'm ready to say, what broken measuring stick are you using?
He looks like Gandalf, and I'm here like like Gimli standing next to him. Somebody says, no, I'm sitting down, people. No, he's actually standing next to me. He's tall and I'm short. So, there is that. So we have that coming up. So now I'm going to take a look at comments again here. Put these up here. I do believe many myths and legends could surge from demonic lies, especially those who defy man-made creations. Absolutely, positively, yes. They could be twisting the original story.
I think that's where it really comes down to, though. But I'd say in every case, they are twisting the original. Because that's what the enemy does. They twist what God originally intended and what he originally wrote. But it's also a lot easier to make a lie easier to swallow if it's built off of just a little grain of truth.
Yeah, that's true.
There's just a little bit of truth in there, then it's easy to make it passable.
As an author, I would say too, though, that God has really given us, we're made in his image. And part of that image that God is creators. We're many creators. Now, unlike him, who can create out of nothing, the best we can do is cobble together stuff that's already been made. I'm also an engineer, and so learning how to solve problems, giving different basic materials, like the basic material being duct tape and WD-40. I mean, those are the true primary mediums of the universe. So it's like 4 fundamental forces of the universe, and there's 2 primary answers to everything. So we have the creative part that we can go for, and we can express that freely in creating these stories, and it's fantastic. And also as a Christian author, not trying to force the gospel into something, but let it naturally flow through the story. Let the story tell itself. That's good. So some of this could be demonic influences. Another thing too is that you see like the fate of Hollywood right now and embracing more and more darkness. And I'm going to make a comment about Disney. Disney seems corporate Disney now, as opposed to the Disney of earlier years, tends to be a corporate monster that swallows up creative individuals and companies, sucks the life out of them like a creative vampire, and spits out the Hulk until it just finally. So I saw a cartoon. I should have taken a pic. I should have shared it as a picture here. Saw a cartoon of this totally emaciated cow. Just it's like a stick, almost like a stick drawing of a cow. And you have Mickey Mouse coming up to him with a bunch of pails, and around the neck of the cow was a sign that said Star Wars. That Disney is milking it dry for everything that's worth going through. So
I think you might have taken Star Wars a little personal.
Yeah,
Just I'm wondering if you're one of those Star Wars fans that were not too happy about where Disney went with Star
no, I
Wars.
had so much
Like
higher
everyone
expectations.
else that is an actual Star Wars fan.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Creative vampires. Just sucking it all up. Can you expand what you mean by demonic lies? Interesting thought. Okay, so this looks like a conversation. Let's follow this conversation and see where it goes. The same way biblical authors were inspired by the Holy Spirits, others by democracy. I think so. And you can even look at maybe if somebody is involved in demonic, you say lifestyle, it's sin, right? Yeah, I mean they're sucked into sin. That's going to come out in their writings. If you have a person who is devoted to God, loving the Lord, loving people around him, that author is going to produce more material that points towards light. And we did a comparison of Frank Herbert's and J.R.R. Tolkien.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good example of dark and light.
Yes.
I mean, their views on what humanity is and what lies for humanity in the future. I mean, one is a fantasy world, but sort of the same concept. If you take their worldviews to the extreme, one is very dark, one is very hopeful.
Yeah. So Frank Herbert, and I enjoyed Dune. Okay. The story actually reading was pretty dry, but I've loved all the kind of the deep world building he's had in there. But the problem is he is showing, and I think somewhat accurately, what happens to the human race if you take God out of it. We totally forsaken others, talking about some kind of God, okay, Shai Hulud, whatever. But the Christian God, the real God, is out of the scene. He's gone, right? And what happens to humanity without him there?
Manipulative control freaks that just want to dominate everyone's lives.
Yes.
And even with the best of intentions, they all are corrupt in the end.
Yep. Now there's a particular reason maybe why he was shown, why Frank Herbert did that, and we can talk about what his approach was and everything. But ultimately speaking, it was a very dark world, as opposed to Lord of the Rings, where even in the midst of Mordor, Samwise Gamgee looks up and says, "See there, Mr. Frodo? A star. I can see it in the sky. There's hope, Mr. Frodo.
Everyone loves
Wake
Sam.
up and get rid of the ring." So
everyone loves Sam.
Yeah, Sam's a favorite, man. I love it. We did that poll and he came out as #1. He was fantastic. Everyone wants to have Sam as a friend, right? Carry us when we're carrying the ring. Understand us. Be all optimistic. Talk about gardening back in the Shire. But that's the point here, that there was light, and you have two individuals, one a Christian, one not. And I'm not saying that all people who are not Christians are not going to be writing good material. I mean, Frank Herbert did do a lot of good world building, or that everything is going to be dark and dreary or anything like that. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying that you do kind of get the sense overall for all authors that there tends to be light and hope in one and not so much in the other. Looking at some of the more comments here. Okay, wow, you guys are really going for it here. So, there we did that. Sorry, kind of coming up. Adam said, "I think it's possible that many of the mythological creatures had their origins in a pre-flood world." That could be
very possible.
And also, if you look at some, what if someone comes across dinosaur bones, fossils? Sorry, not bones, but fossils. How would someone explain that without having a greater understanding of the creatures that they came from? You might look at it like an elephant skull, and right in the middle there's a big gap. Was that maybe some of the idea where a cyclops came from? Because it looks like an eye can go there. So all these things, we don't know. That's just speculation. And Adam said, in a world where fallen angels were literally walking the earth, you would see a lot of wild stuff. I'm not sure if we're talking about the Nephilim there. there's different. That's a difficult passage to look at because it talks about the sons of man, the sons of God. That's something we can tackle later. But at the very least, there were other influences there that go on with writing. Some other forces, some other methods or sources of inspiration can be involved. So we have coming up next on Thursday, we're going to be looking at our take on the apologetic con. I'm going to share 5 things I learned, the top 5 things. There's many things I learned, but the top 5 things learned from our experience down there. By the way, this is Dr. Turk. This is a picture that I took. This is Dr. Turk explaining, giving a presentation during Apologetic Con, and he's the same guy that wrote this book. And good stuff. Good stuff. A lot of good material. There's no way I could cover it all in one live stream. So I'm going to try to summarize it as much as possible, give you the golden nuggets that I got out of it. And then next Tuesday, going to be starting our dive into Godzilla and Kong. And we're going to look at the MonsterVerse. Now, this is there's 2 main groups of movies that have come out. One, we said earlier, from Toho Studios in Japan, and the other from, I believe it's Legendary Productions in the U.S. And they had their own version of Godzilla, and there's the Japanese version. And Godzilla -1, fantastic. It was a really well done movie. I have to say, going forward, looking at this next one coming out from the MonsterVerse,
it's going to be a different flavor.
It is definitely a different flavor.
Yeah.
So do you want Chinese? I mean, the Japanese food? Do you want sushi, or do you want a hamburger? And I guess it depends on what you're looking for. But we're gonna do this review, and then we're gonna check out the movie and give a review fresh out of the theater, just like we did for Dune. We're going to do for this as well.
Yep.
And the main reason for this